time someone runs more than a kilometre next to someone, they label it as an iron war. And, you know, you've got a real respect for the people who have gone before us. Do you think we are as good as updating and keeping people across our history as, say, cycling or anything like that?
I think that's the biggest letdown in triathlon, is the fact that there isn't such a focus on people who have come before. We know one thing, Iron War, and now every time, like you said, I ran with Andreas Rayland, Iron War 2, it's like, oh, come on, man. Like, do you know what the Iron War really was? Two men who didn't like each other, man. Like, two complete opposite spectrums. Probably the greatest triathlete of that time in Mark Allen, who would continually fail and continually taken down by Dave Scott, a guy who pissed him off, a guy who didn't like him, a guy who, and they came together and ran. That's Iron War, not Brownie and Crowe in Melbourne. That was a great race, iron battle. You know, not me and Andreas Raylert, who caught me with 5k to go in Kona. Iron War 2. I'm like, oh man. You know, I get a little bit embarrassed because I knew what Iron War meant to me when I was growing up. I watched that race 10,000 times. And you understand the history of that race. And you know, I get sad that there isn't a focus on many of the other great races, and there isn't an understanding amongst the new age pros of who came before them, of the great athletes that came before, and understanding what they did outside of Kona. And I think, you know, there's so much information out there now that I think everything gets lost in I think it was in the 80s and early 90s. There was magazines that you read and reread and reread and reread, so you really embraced and waited for that next month's magazine to come out. And you know, I think you had a better affinity and a better appreciation of the athletes and understanding of what happened. Where now it just gets lost in blah. You know, which is sad.
So the era you're talking about, the 80s, late 80s and 90s, and you had people like Jürgen Zach, and you had, you know, the big four, of course, and you had Mike Peake and these amazing
You had Welshie, who was a happy-go-lucky. You had Paulie Curie, the robot. You know,
and they all had the nicknames,
yeah,
the Terminator,
totally,
the Grip, the Man. I mean, you weren't anybody unless you had a
well,
nickname.
nowadays, if you say something like I do and you become labelled a character, you're alienated. You know, like, oh mate, he's outspoken, like blah blah blah, he's a media hunter. You know, like, hey, it's just you know, people today are so worried about putting it on the line, and I think you can't market a character. You need to be one. And Jürgen Zach, the way he presented himself, the way he rolled into San Diego. I remember even in 2000 being in San Diego, the whispers 2 weeks before was Jürgen's coming to town next Wednesday. Jürgen's coming to town. You remember that? And that was because that's, you know, they were that. They were that in the way they behaved. They were that in the way they held themselves. And you know, I think the sport misses that. The sport needs that. And these kids and the new age pros and the new guys coming need to understand that it's not bad to lay your hat on something, to stand up for something, to state something, to believe it and be public about that. But people are so fearful that, I can't believe you said you were going to win and you came fifth, haha. You know, like, Jürgen Zach said he was going to smash everyone at every race. Like, Greg Welsh was, you know, that's what created it, and that's what kept the interest, and that's why the stories, you know, you look back at the 91, 92 coverage, they were, you know, you're following sixth place finish, and nowadays he cuts off after the third guy because really the rest of them are boring, and I don't mean that absolutely not in a nice way. They're boring people. I'm a fan of the sport and I find a lot of these guys boring, so I just wish that we could guys and girls didn't feel so caught up in this lifestyle loveliness and love fest of being a pro, and they could actually stand up and state what they really have. There's two characters nowadays. There's their public persona and there's private persona. Let's make them one and live with what you state. It makes things more interesting, you know. And I see it all the time. I hear these guys whinge behind the scene. I see them in front of a camera like this going, I just want to have a great day, and I think training's been exceptional, and you know, I have utmost respect for these guys, and we'll see at the end of the race day, all things have been ticked, training's gone well behind the scene. I want to kick everyone's ass tomorrow. I'm like, why did you say it in front of the camera, mate? Like, you know, like, why didn't you just say it? Oh, I don't. Mate, what if I don't? I'm like, well, there you go, there's the problem, you know, and that's the difference.
Man athlete in the world at the moment?
Craig Alexander. Yeah, I think Craig Alexander he's picked up his bike, he made those improvements. I think where you got to give guys like Crowe the respect, and I think the guys made the error in years past, is that he adapts. And the greatest athletes are the ones that have the ability to adapt, because it's hard to change. When you have a formula that wins, it can be your biggest weakness and your biggest strength. And I was able to capitalise that in 2010. And I capitalised in the sense that Crowe was my biggest fear going into the race, and I had to look at what he was doing and think, okay, if I was Craig Alexander, I've won this Ironman with the run, I'm going to roll that same dice again. Why would you change when you've had 2 successes with it? Actually 3, he got second in 2007. So I've got to form another strategy, which we did, and was able to highlight a weakness, get away with it, and win the race. But his strength of character showed in 2011. He went back to the drawing board, changed the race where he was, became a bike rider, posted the second fastest time of the day, and ran a steady marathon, not his best ever marathon, won the race. And that, to me, is a dangerous athlete. And you look at these other athletes, they just go back and continually do the same thing, and there lieth their weakness. And that's the greatest strength of someone like Lance Armstrong. They have the courage of character to study, to look at races, to look at people and go, this is what I need to do to be my best. And that's why at the moment Craig Alexander, I don't see anyone, unless I come back, standing in his way of winning 4 titles. Well, I think I have to look at the run. I've got to look at what I've done in the last year. I studied. I think Crowe's been, despite what everyone's probably going to say here, he's still running fast, but I think his vulnerability, his strength on the run isn't the same as it used to be. And Brownie really pushed him hard in Melbourne, and we went sub-8, but I just look at the other guys went very, very quick. So let's take the time out of the equation. Let's just look at the performance of the other guys. There was 8:01, so it was 8:04 debuts. So she's a fast course, and guys who I don't think are 240 runners are running low 240. So she's a fast marathon, but I think he's been more vulnerable on the run because he's human. He's picked up his bike and he's been more vulnerable on the run than he was in years past. So maybe it could be a running approach. Maybe it's looking at how I could topple him on the run. He's very, very confident in his run, but I thought Kona in 2011, I give him utmost respect because he was suffering for 5K and he got home, and it's the most vulnerable I'd ever seen him on the run again. I think it's a running approach. I think a running approach will get this guy. I think the pace is going to be hot on the bike. There's going to be a lot more media pressure. You're going to have guys like Craig who need to chase. The focus is on them, and they're going to set a good tempo. And I think a patience game more than anything in Kona this year could win you the race. And whoever can run out of that energy lab and come home quick could win. And I think a running game for me will win me. I've done the speed. I've just got to have the endurance, and I'm a lot leaner than I have been.